I think there's still a large portion of people out there that are stuck in Lollipop Narnia Fantasyland when it comes to how big the video game industry is. A lot of people still seem to think that it's some kind of grassroots, underground hobby. It's not mainstream, so they'll get a smile on their face when they see video games referenced anywhere in the world because they think it's like an underdog story, when that couldn't be further from the truth. The video game industry since 2020 has done more annual revenue than the movie and music industry combined, and it's not even close. In 2020, there was over 159 billion clams generated by the video game sector of the entertainment industry, and that number has only continued to grow exponentially. An astronomical explosion here from video games. So you're not exactly some kind of rare specimen if you happen to be an avid gamer. You're part of the largest industry in the entertainment space. And for a lot of people, that may be a tough pill to swallow. That may be hitting you with the cold water first thing in the morning, but it's important for what I want to talk about today. Because this business is so large, things have gotten real stinky in terms of business practices surrounding it. When it is such a huge industry, of course it's going to be exploited by some evil, soulless suits at the top of the food chain looking to nickel and dime everyone for a profit. And recently, this has come in the form of releasing subpar products for an increased price, games becoming $70 more frequently, and the game's quality being unforgivably dog shit more frequently. Which is why Twitter apologies from developers have become more common than the cold, because their games are releasing in buggy, broken states and the consumers aren't happy about it. So then they go ahead and puke out some corporate drivel onto their Twitter accounts and say, whoops-a-daisy, can't believe that you guys are responding this way. Sorry about that, but thanks for the money. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the Tooth Fairy leaves a little hollow promise under your pillow as well in these Twitter apologies with some kind of big, bold statement about how they're committed to fixing everything wrong with it. And that never comes. That just doesn't happen. They go to the store for milk and they're not coming back. So that's been kind of the landscape of the AAA gaming space over the last year, really. And now we're starting to see something else develop here, where entire studios are getting shut down following a flop or following a bad release. The most recent one that just happened today, as of making this video, is Volition just announced that it's shutting its doors. After nearly 30 years in the video game industry, 3 decades in the trenches of gaming, they are going out with the saddest whimper. Following the flop that was the most recent Saints Row game, a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane of trash, the game was bad, wasn't received well, and now that is their swan song. Which is just tragic, because now they can't even get into Valhalla, because they didn't die a hero's death in battle. They died a sad death in cringe, with the final Saints Row being their last game they made. It's really unfortunate because, for the most part, their resume slaps. They're responsible for some iconic bangers that I look back on so fondly even today. Like, during streams, you'll oftentimes hear me reference games that I think truly, were masterpieces, that super innovative. And one of those games actually comes from Volition. It's called Red Faction Guerrilla. To date, still has one of the most interesting mechanics with its fully destructible environments that I haven't seen replicated in anything else ever since. And of course, they are still responsible for the original Saints Row games that most people still love. But because the video game space has become so big and so filled with money, doubloons leaking out of every single, orifice of this industry, it means that every game costs so much to make. And the most recent Saints Row game was in development for 5 or so years, and it didn't do well. They had nothing to show for it. And even the previous game before that also didn't do super well. So the development time on games is longer than it has ever been. Most games that are coming out now are spending 5 years in development in most cases, or somewhere in that general ballpark. So these games take super long to make, which is very expensive because of all of the labor that you're paying for over that long period of time. And then if the game comes out and it doesn't sell $500 million worth of copies or microtransactions, then the company loses so much money on it. And that leads to closures like this. It's because the video game space is so fucking bloated. It is actually suffering from success with how much money is in the space now, that everything needs to be this $500 million winner in order for it to even generate the slightest bit of profit, it feels like. So it's just really sad because Volition is a very talented studio and has always been a talented studio. They lost their footing and have delivered some bad games in recent times, but I really feel like if the space wasn't in the current condition that it is, and I do think it's like kind of on life support right now when it comes to AAA games, because this isn't sustainable. Every single AAA game can't spend 5 or 6 years in development and need to sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of copies and microtransactions for it to make a profit. That's not going to last. So I think we're in the middle of a potential bursting here of the AAA gaming bubble, but I'm getting off on a tangent. If the space wasn't in that condition, I think Volition could have bounced back from this and delivered a better game, a new IP, and really come back in a strong way. But this is another thing. A lot of studios don't want to really take a chance on a new IP, just like in the movie industry, because it's uncertain. When you go with a established IP like Saints Row, it comes with a built-in fan base. You can guarantee there will be interest in it off rip because it is an established franchise. With a new IP, you don't have that safety net. And since there's so much money at stake here for these companies, they're not willing to gamble on a new IP, which sucks, and it's why you don't see a ton of new IP come from AAA game devs, which is why indie games are so important and anything that's not AAA. They're kind of filling that void of new, creative, innovative IPs. But I'd love to see the return of mid-budget, mid-sized, wacky AAA titles that have no tie-in to any established franchises, just an entirely new IP. Fucking Operation American Protocol, Patriot Spaceman. I don't know, I don't care. Just investing in things that aren't going to cost millions upon millions of dollars and take many years worth of development time, and then just eventually getting pushed over the finish line sloppily and releasing a buggy, broken mess. Because it's getting extremely tiresome in the AAA space. And I'm really upset that Volition closed, to be honest. Yes, I hated the new Saints Row game, but that doesn't mean that I think Volition itself was a bad studio that was incapable of releasing good games. And this kind of thing actually just happened recently as well, even before Volition, with the Lord of the Rings Gollum developers, Daedalic Entertainment. Now, Lord of the Rings Gollum, it's not winning any Game of the Year awards. Is Lord of the Rings Gollum the best game ever made? No. Is it the worst game ever made? Maybe. It's bad. It's really bad. It is definitely 2023's biggest stinker. And I will say I was somewhat excited to hear that for some reason they were going to be making another Lord of the Rings game, because I thought there's no way it could possibly be this bad twice. But out of nowhere, they released a statement saying that the developer Daedalic Entertainment is closing down. And I actually felt really sad for that entire team because this was their first time doing something in this genre. They are not developers in this genre at all. They make point-and-click games. And from everything I've read about their other projects, they make good point-and-click games, but were put on this task and just really weren't able to nail it. And one super stinker shut down the entire company, which had a history of delivering good point-and-click games. And that's just sad. Like, that just hurts to read. They weren't even just given another chance to go back to making their bread and butter. They made a horrible game, yes, and then got shut down for it without even getting a redemption arc of just making the games they know how to make well. Now, I guess it's not fair to say that it shut down the entire studio. It shut down their internal developers. So Daedalic does still exist, but not in the form that it used to. It doesn't have the teams that are responsible for developing games like Lord of the Rings Gollum or the upcoming Lord of the Rings game they were working on. So, also, it was directly the result of the game's horrible reception and awful sales. And again, this is a game that took them quite a while to develop. This wasn't exactly something that they just shit out into existence over the matter of like 8 months or anything. They spent a lot of time on it, and it didn't perform well. And in the modern landscape of gaming, if you spend a lot of time on a game and it doesn't sell well, it's like a death sentence for the company, it seems. Just, again, because there is so much money invested into the space that when something doesn't do well, I guess the higher-ups no longer see any way of justifying the cost for keeping the studio running, so it seems like they're more than willing to pull the trigger on just shutting them down. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to go over this after reading about the Volition shutdown. I am sad to see them go, as well as Daedalic, and yeah, that's really about it. See ya.